Hey, welcome to the Relentless Positive Podcast. I'm your host, Joe Martin. And my guest today, she's a lawyer. She's a former judge. She's actually the first Hispanic female judge in the Virgin Islands, which we're getting into later because we were talking before we got on here. Maybe you've heard of the Virgin Islands as a vacation spot, but there's actually people that live there. We're going to learn more about their lives there. She's also a children's author, and she's on a mission to help every child to be able to read. It's going to change the world. Thank you so much for being here, Judge. I'm looking forward to getting into this.
Thank you, Joe. I'm excited to be here and give information so your listening audience can learn about us. It's the U.S. Virgin Islands because there are British Virgin Islands, and I'll talk some more about that later on. But just so that they know that's the U.S. Virgin Islands that I'm from, and I'm the first Hispanic judge from St. Thomas.
From St. Thomas. Okay.
Yes,
Yeah, there we
just
go. So
yes.
you kind of brought it up. So can you share some memories from your childhood and how your upbringing in the U.S. Virgin Islands influenced your perspective on life and justice and all these different things? What did you see growing up?
Yes, I'm from St. Thomas, and it's a small community, like a small town. There are about less than 50,000 people. It's a beautiful island, very mountainous, very commercially oriented. My parents were small business owners, and for both of them, English was a second language. So growing up, I have four sisters, and they emphasized that we would only speak English at home because then in the 60s and 70s and 80s, many people for whom English was a second language felt that English was the language of success. And to get ahead in life, you had to speak English well. And that's the belief my parents had. And so we only spoke English at home. And as growing up with the small business, I saw my mother and father work very hard to support us, and there are five girls, and I just was raised with that hard work mentality. And also, my father was a saver. He was always saving money, and he really mentored to us. It's important to save money, save it for a rainy day, and opened a bank account when I was a little girl babysitting. So it was like I was raised with a business mentality. And as I mentioned, St. Thomas is very business oriented. We were, over our history, a commercial port where we're located, of course, in the Caribbean, just east of Puerto Rico and Cuba. We're the easternmost part of the United States. And over hundreds and hundreds of years, we were owned by seven different countries. The one who owned us the longest was Denmark. But you had France, you had Spain, even the Knights of Malta owned
Wow.
the U.S. Virgin Islands. Well, we weren't U.S. Virgin Islands back then, but the Virgin Islands. And uh, the ships, the importance for us was that the ships would come from Europe, and as they were sailing towards South America, they would stop on St. Thomas and reprovision. So we had a number of warehouses where they would reprovision, and then they would go on from our location down around the tip of South America and then on to the Orient. That was before, of course, the Panama Canal was built. But after the Panama Canal, we were still a reprovisioning port for ships. So we have people from many different countries who reside here. We're a real melting pot, and it's so beautiful to see that. To see people of all types of colors and races and speaking different languages, and but of course we are and have been owned since 1917 by the United States.
Wow. I feel like I was in history class. That was fun right there. I learned a lot. I didn't know about Malta. That was a surprise for me.
Yeah, the Knights of Malta. Yes.
Yeah, I wasn't ready for that one. So,
Yes.
what did you do for fun growing up? What would you like to do?
And people will think, oh, what a nerd. But my parents just mentored this love of reading. And I just remember growing up and seeing them reading newspapers and periodicals. And every weekend we were at the library, the public library, which was close to our home. And that's how we spent our weekends. And people, as I mentioned, will think we were nerds, but I got to travel in my imagination. And during the summer, when they had summer programs for children, My sisters and I were right there. We were participating, checking out books. So typically, that's how we spent both our weekends, our holidays, our summer vacations, just checking out books and reading books and talking about books. Yeah, and even I have 2 sons, and when we traveled, I always took them to public libraries too. We would get a temporary library card, we go in and we check out books for them. So I kind of I learned that from my parents and I continued it with my sons. Nowadays, you don't have to actually go physically into a library. You can check out books virtually, but I just love the feel of a book in hand.
I do too. It's the same. I do
Yes.
use a Kindle, but I do like the feel
Yes.
of a physical book. But
Yes.
um,
Yes. Yeah, and I think
maybe they
especially
thought you were nerds growing up, but you did become a judge, so I think it
yes.
paid off pretty well. So,
Yeah,
gotta.
thank
Speaking
you,
of that,
thank you.
what did kind of spur your interest in the law in the first place?
Well, I always used to love to watch uh, news broadcasts. My father loved Walter Cronkite. If you remember way back then, some of you don't know who Walter Cronkite was, but he was a very famous news broadcaster. So every weekday, we would just sit around the TV and listen to the news. And it was just, we listened, learned, and then we discussed. So I learned a lot from that. And then I remember when I was in high school, there was the many news shows about the impeachment proceedings for President Richard Nixon, and I was just glued to that and fascinating by all the different arguments that were made. And it was in high school that I said, I'm passionate about representing people and especially the underprivileged and supporting them, helping them get better and have laws that would support them and promote their families and their education. And my father used to always say that I would argue with a stop sign. So arguing arguing became kind of natural for me. So that started it all. And I loved Ralph Nader. He was another one that I just admired and followed his career, read a lot of books about him and the cases that he won. And he was really a rising star too when I was growing up. And uh, him and Shirley Chisholm, who was African American. I think she was in the House of Representatives from New York. It was just wonderful to see these people and how they would put arguments together, how they would speak. And that's what made me feel, hey, the law is a profession I would really like to go into.
And I can tell you have an attention for detail too. That I'm sure that
Yes,
came in very handy
yes,
in
yes,
lawyer. So,
yes. I
so
certainly do.
yeah, I can tell just by the little things you can pick up. So, you become a lawyer. How does that become you? What's the path from there becoming a judge later on?
Yes, well, to be a lawyer, you go to 4 years typically of college. I did college in 3 years. I went during the summers and I went to law school 3 years. And when I graduated, my whole desire was to return home back to St. Thomas. And it was, uh, I was very fortunate. And I say I'm blessed because I am a Christian that I was able to work as a law clerk at our then, it was called the territorial court. And Congress, we're a creature of Congress. We're a territory of the United States. We are full citizens. However, we are not allowed to vote in the presidential elections. And we have a representative to Congress, but the representative can't vote on the floor, just in committee. It's just a weird setup. So we're a creature of Congress. Congress con- controls the laws that apply to us. And uh, began working at the territorial court. That was the name of it back then for judge. Got to see the inner workings of a court and really got my feet wet. And then I did a little bit of work to a very powerful with a very powerful what we call presiding judge or the head of our court system. Very brilliant man, very politically savvy. And after my clerkship for 1 year, and I recommend that to students who graduate to work at a court because, especially if you want to go into private practice, and you get to meet all the judges, you get to know all the people in the court. So then when I left the court, I went into private practice. And then I just had a desire to one day be a judge. And just as you mentioned, my attention to detail, I was always very well prepared when I presented a case in court. And I wrote well, very concise. And so the judges really had a high opinion of me. And when there was a vacancy at the court, the powerful presiding judge spoke to his friend, our governor, and the governor is the one who nominates the attorney to be a judge. And he nominated me. I was young. I think I was 34 years old at the
Wow.
time. So one of the youngest, if not the youngest, attorneys to be appointed as a judge. And I went before our legislature. I was confirmed, and it was a 6-year term. Unfortunately, there's a lot of politics involved, and we're a small community. But you have to be able to maneuver those politics as best as you can in a very small community. But I felt blessed that I was able to serve as a judge. I actually served for 6.5 years, and then politics came into play. I was not reappointed, and I went back. I reopened my law office and really thrived.
Oh, wow. What a journey,
Yes.
man! I just need a flow chart to feel
Yeah.
all that where all that
Yes.
fits, and the judges
Yes.
and the
Yeah.
different
Yeah.
courts and all that. Yeah, I wouldn't be able to keep
Yes.
up. So,
Yes.
when you were as you were serving as a judge, what were some of your most challenging cases when you look back?
Back then, our courts were what are called general jurisdiction courts, meaning we handled every type of case. So I would have a traffic case one day in the week involving traffic tickets. And then the next day, I would have a divorce case, or I would
Wow.
have a case involving probate, a will, or I would have a small claims case. And then certain weeks, we had jury trials, civil trials, if somebody slipped and fell, or breach of contract, or we would have major jury trials for criminal cases involving first degree murder, first degree rape, you
Wow.
name it. So it was a variety of different issues. And for 2.5 years of the 6.5 years that I served as a judge, I was assigned to the family court. And I can tell you that was a very eye opening experience for me because I saw all the trauma, all the tragedies, uh, all the problems that were going on in families. And I would see, for example, I handled domestic violence cases, and I would see a woman, usually the mother, come into the court for domestic violence, a charge against the man or her husband. I would see them one day in court. And then another day, I would find out that, oh, there's their son is involved in a juvenile case. So it seemed as if the tragedy really it permeated the families. And I began to realize, especially with the young men, a lot of young men were Black and Hispanic. We're predominantly Black, the descendants of the enslaved Africans who were brought over from Africa to work on the sugar cane plantations. Fortunately for St. Thomas, we are very mountainous, so we didn't have a lot of plantations, but another island, St. Croix, had them. So at St. Thomas, as I mentioned, we were mostly business oriented, but still we have a predominant part of the population who are descendants from these enslaved Africans who were brought over. And then you have people of Spanish heritage, myself and my family, who came from Puerto Rico and migrated over, and many, many other people of different races. But African descendants of Africans and Puerto Ricans are the predominant races here, or minorities. And I would see the young men in court, and this typically it was a juvenile uh, issue, meaning they got involved whether they were not attending school, they were involved with drugs, they became involved with crime. And the family court is set up to try to intervene, help the families while the child is still a teenager, try to get the child back on track. And I started to realize that these predominantly young men that were in the system, their reading skills are very poor. So, how are you going to get somebody back on track education wise if they can't read well? And I had one example, a young man who had stopped going to school and was before me for dropping out of school, truancy. And the social worker who was assigned to him made a recommendation to me, and I'm a young judge, and I listened to her recommendation, and I thought it was a great idea. She said, Judge, why don't you require that he read a book and submit a book report to you? I said, what a great idea. You know what? If he reads a good book, then that's going to open up his love for books. That's how I was thinking. But unfortunately, what happened was the next time I reviewed the young man's case, it would the cases would rotate back. So maybe every 2 months, every 3 months, the juvenile offender would come back into the courtroom with the social worker and parents. And I remember sitting in my chambers before the case was called, looking at the book report that he had written, supposedly written. And I said, "Oh my gosh!" And I had read the book, and I said to myself, "Oh my gosh, this is perfect grammar and very intricate detail." He could not have written that. So when I went into the courtroom, I asked him questions that he would have had to have read the book to have known the answers to. He didn't know. So what he had done was just copied it. Back then it was called Cliff Notes. Now you can go
Oh
on
yeah.
the internet and get the reports. So I realized the total lack of literacy skills and how that affects a big part of our population. And if our children could read and read well, that would be an answer to a lot of our problems, especially what we see going on in the criminal justice system. So then I just began this pursuit to study more, to learn more about this. And I'm really passionate about just spreading the word about how important literacy is. And if you can start it with your children at a young age, that's the best.
Man, I think a lot of us just take it for granted that our kids
Yes.
just going to grow up and they read, and that's not
Mhm.
the case. Can you share the
Yes.
stats on how fourth graders, what the literacy rate is for fourth graders?
Yes, recent study came out from Kids Count data, which is from the Annie E. Casey Foundation, which was a wonderful foundation that collects data of children and their families from all 50 states and from Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands. For the most recent statistics is 68% of fourth graders do not read to grade level. And that's scary, 68%, because what happens in fourth grade is it's no longer learning to read, but reading to learn. So the children now are expected to read, and they're reading so they can learn the subjects as they go on. And I've read a lot of articles and I've seen programs with teachers who are saying, we're not taught we haven't been taught to teach children to read when they're in fifth, sixth grade, and in middle school.
Yeah.
No, we're supposed to be teaching them subjects, but now the teachers are finding that they have to step back and be able to learn themselves how to teach children to read at this older age. So it's becoming a real challenge in the elementary and middle schools to deal with this. It's a big problem. Can you imagine not being able to read? And then what are we graduating? If they graduate, and the reason why they test them at the end of third grade is so that the school system can find out who is having problems with reading, who's not proficient, so they can help them. But unfortunately, that likely doesn't happen. So the child continues on and somehow survives or drops out of school and then gets involved with drugs, with crimes, and into the criminal justice system, or is just passed on, allowed to graduate with very low reading abilities.
Wow. Yeah, if it starts at fourth grade, then you just get behind more and more every
Yes,
year as it
exactly.
goes
You
on.
get behind. Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
those
There's
numbers are
no
way
help.
higher than I would have thought. That
Yes,
is
I was
discouraging.
shocked. 68%.
Wow.
Yes.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
so what are some of the initiatives that you've been involved in that can help these kids read?
Yes. Well, I'm a children's author, and that's one thing that God put on my heart. And it all started one Sunday when I was in church, and the pastor said that the children's ministry needed parents to volunteer because they didn't have enough volunteers. And I have two sons who are in the children's ministry, and I felt guilty. So he said, if you want to volunteer, raise your hand. So I reluctantly raised my hand. of course, we all say to ourselves, we're too busy. That's just babysitting for our children. And that was one of the most amazing times I've had. I realized that God gave me a gift to actually work with children. So I participated in the children's ministry. I loved it. I started writing plays. I actually wrote a Christmas play for the children to perform, and that became my first book. It's Not About You, Mr. Santa Claus, a love letter about the true meaning of Christmas. And it shows how we've deviated from what the true meaning of Christmas was. It's become too materialistic. So it's a book, and all my books are for children 4 to about 8 years old. So that was my first book, and that just raised the passion to talk more about children and being able to read better to them. And I've written 5 books, all on the holidays: Easter, 4th of July, Halloween, Thanksgiving, and Christmas. So after I wrote my 5th book, I just wanted to know what direction God was calling me in. And I realized that I personified this uh, whole literacy initiative because of my how I was raised, and how for my parents reading was so important, and they passed that down. And I remember, Joe, that my mother, she wasn't a teacher, but you could say she was a homeschool teacher. And she taught me how to read, and my sisters. But I remember specifically for me, we would be sitting on the couch. I was 3 years old. We'd be sitting on the couch, and she'd be with letters, pronouncing sounds. And by age of 4, I started first grade. And
Wow.
when she tried to get me into the public school system here, they said, absolutely not. She's too young. She's not going to be able to keep up with all the other students. So my mother found a private school, a parochial school, who accepted me, and I was 4 years old in first grade, and I was ahead of all the other students because I knew how to read well. And that just continued on. I was always ahead because of my reading abilities. And that's what I love to talk to parents and tell them about my upbringing, and then how I raised my sons, how my late husband and I should say, raised my sons. And just, it's really up to parents. You can't push that on to teachers.
Right.
It has to be the parents who are the ones motivating the child to read. And so that's now the mission that I'm on, not only promoting my books, but also talking a lot about the importance of literacy in a child's life. And that's one of the foundations for a child's success, is being able to read and read well.
So with parents right now, maybe they haven't been doing much reading at home and things like that. What would be the
Yes.
first place you would start with? How would you recommend? What would you recommend they start with?
Well, they should understand the problem, which is the inability to read well that exists, and how understand how important reading is for their child's success in life. And and even if they don't read themselves much, if they start becoming involved with books, it'll spark love in them, I believe, very strongly. But to understand, and it doesn't matter how young or old the child is, it's better, of course, you start off with them young, because then you can train them up. But spending time with your child when they're small and they can't actually read, but you can read to them. And it develops so much bonding time. And it's just so many memories. And my late husband and I have memories with our sons on Saturday morning, getting coffee, and they'll hop into our bed and we'd just read a book, and we'd be laughing in the car with a book, reading and laughing. And it's, but again, it's all the parents. The parents have to plan it out. They have to set time aside at night to read to their children. And I read a statistic that only 20 minutes a day, Monday through Friday, 20 minutes a day, a child learns 1.8 million new words in a
Wow.
school year. Isn't that shocking?
Wow.
1.8 million new words. And so don't think you have to be there an hour reading to them. Of course, I'm sure they would love that. But just 20 minutes, and look how their vocabulary expands. And so much goes on when you're reading to children. Their minds are not haphazardly not paying attention. No, their minds are developing. They're learning sounds, they're learning new words, they're looking at the pictures, all of that. And that's all developing their brains and their ability to think, put words together. And I'm so passionate about it because I know how reading can change a person's life and actually bring them success rather than saying, "Oh, I don't like to read. That book is boring." And I encourage parents, if a child says that, find out what the child likes and wants to read. My two sons, especially my oldest son, he was an athlete, or he is an athlete, but growing up, he loved to play soccer, he loved to play basketball. And what did I do? I searched for books on uh, people who, typically it was men, athletes who played soccer, who played basketball, whether they were fiction or nonfiction. And those are the books we checked out. It Comic books. Yes, I encourage that as long as they're clean, no bad words, nothing scary. Calvin and Hobbes. My
Oh,
sons love
the
those
best.
books.
He's the
Yeah,
best.
I
Yeah.
have them. I have them. I bought all of them. I bought the whole series and I have them. I would like to give it to them once they have their own children. Yeah, so there's so much that we can done that for children, that if you get involved with listening to them, what do they like to read? What dinosaurs too for boys. So I mean, we just did almost every kind of dinosaur book and toys. So it's getting the child's uh, passion. What do they like? And then working with that and uh, joining them. It's not go find a book and go and read by yourself.
Yeah.
Join them every once in a while. I'm sure parents can't do it all the time, but as much as they can.
Yeah, but I think it's. I mean, I think the picture. Oh, I'm gonna have to go in there and read War and Peace or some boring book they
Yeah,
remember
I
from
know.
school. These giant,
Yes.
tomes. I mean,
Yes.
there's so
Yes.
many varieties. That's what we did with my son. Exactly what you said. Calvin and
Yes.
Hobbes. Man,
Yes.
I still have fond memories of sitting there reading that with him, and then comic books as well.
Yes.
If
Yes.
he'll get you
Yes.
reading, it's like lifting weights for your brain. Get in there and
Exactly.
get that workout for your
Exactly.
brain. So
Yes.
yeah, I think
Yes.
people do picture that they have to do this like, oh, I got to be this like super stuffy. It has to be a
Yes.
history book or something like that. It can be
Yes.
fun. Reading is,
Yes.
and there's a way
Yes.
that you can do it,
Yeah. Lots
uh,
of them.
and they're out
Yes.
there. And there's so many varieties,
Yes.
like you said, and it's online and physical books. There's so many options. Hey, I don't know if you guys know this, but public library completely free.
Yes.
It's completely
Yes.
free, right? There go,
Yes.
but that's
Yes,
it.
and so true. And parents will say, "Oh, it's too expensive." You don't have to buy a book. You can
Mhm.
just check it out from the public library.
Yeah, and now,
There's
for me,
really no
like we talked
excuse.
about the Kindles,
Mm-mm.
you don't have to go
Yeah.
there. You can just
No, you
download it
don't.
straight to your house. Doesn't
No.
cost you a
No.
thing. Doesn't take up a bunch of
No.
space on your bookshelf. So yeah,
Exactly.
and
Exactly. But I think for children, it's great to have both, to have the actual physical book
hmm
and then one on an electronic device.
absolutely, yeah. Like I
Yes.
said, the physical book's always better for me. I don't know,
Yes.
something
Yes.
about it. So
Yes.
uh, so do you
Yes,
have any
definitely.
upcoming projects or anything you're working on that do? I know you're always working on
Yes.
something. So what's coming
Yes.
up?
Yeah. Well, I do attend various homeschool conventions to promote my books, and I do workshops talking to parents about these very same ideas. And then I've developed a series of videos. There's 7 of them that I have up on my website about just about what we're talking about, talking to parents. These are all the different things that you can do. And they're short videos, but based on my experience, the experience of lots of other parents I've spoken to. So I put a lot of information in there, even though they may be 10, 15, 20 minutes long, 25 minutes long. It's just filled with information to help parents understand how they can ignite that flame in their children. It's going to take work, it's going to be up to them, nobody else but them. And I even have one video that's dedicated to detoxing your children from the electronic devices. I felt that was so important. I committed one video just to that. And you, you've got to regulate that as a parent.
Absolutely. It's so tough because, they're everywhere. The devices are
Yes.
everywhere. But yeah, so
Yes.
that's great. And that's all on your website. Can you name your website? I'm going to link it in show notes. Could
Yes.
you just tell the people right now?
Yes, it's sorayadiasecofelt.com. It's sorayadiasecoffelt.com. And there you'll see all my children's books, and then you'll see the link to Teachable, where I have 7 videos. I have 6 videos in the package, but the 7th one is the intro one that I give for free when you buy the package. And my passion is to promote this whole concept. And I'm starting a reading revolution because it's a revolution where parents understand that it's up to them and they can turn their children around if they're not readers yet. Because I have a lot of parents that come to my workshops who have children who are 8 or 9 years old, and typically they're boys who say they're bored, they don't want to read. So it's important for them to check out my videos because it's filled with a lot of ideas. And as a mother of two sons, I have a lot of ideas as to how to raise boys who love to read.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, it's tough to compete video games versus books, but once they get
Yes,
into books,
yes.
it's not easy at the beginning. If you've never been into
No, no,
books and
it's
you've
not
all played
easy.
video games, but it's so worth
No.
it. You'll see your kid;
Yes,
they'll get to
yes,
where they actually enjoy the books a little bit better. It's kind of crazy.
yes, yes,
I've seen
yes,
it. I've seen it in my son as well.
yes, yes,
So
certainly.
so when you look back on your career, uh, what do you hope your legacy will be? You've done a lot of different things, all kind of affected a lot of different areas. What do you want your legacy to be?
As a Christian, I always want to say that I pray that I'm achieving what God has created me to achieve, and He's put that love in me for children. And now this whole uh, new idea I have with these videos to speak more and more about the importance of literacy in a child's life. And I hope to go to be at speaking events and do many more workshops as well as webinars where people can participate live, so they don't just have my videos but live webinars, and just promote this whole idea and leading this reading revolution. Because unless we take that concept back and raise children who love to read, just look at what our country will be. It's just who's going to be able to calculate, uh, aside from math, I should say, not really get into calculations, but who's going to be able to write a cogent email, write a letter? Can your children even read instructions? Uh, Listen to a doctor and understand instructions that are given, that are written down in regard to medication. How many times a day does it require us to read? And if your child does not know how to read well, how are they going to survive? Are they going to be at a minimum wage job all their life? So I think reading really raises a child to be a leader, to think on their own, and to be able to speak cogently. And I tell people, and they're surprised because I love to go into the schools, elementary schools, and Head Start centers and read to children. And I can tell immediately when I'm reading a book, I always stop and I ask the children questions as I'm reading. I can tell immediately who are readers.
Hmm.
Why? Because they're paying attention, they're asking questions, they're interested, and you listen to the way they speak well. And these are fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh grade, 7-year-old children. So, so don't tell me that reading doesn't have such an impact, because it does, has a big impact. And if we lay the foundation from a young age, then the sky's the limit. And how can God use them? God can use them tremendously.
Oh, that's a heck of a legacy right there, and you absolutely
Yes,
nail it.
yes.
I participated in the Read Across America a couple weeks ago, and
Wonderful.
I went to a school, and a lot of the kids in there, English was their second language, and they were locked in. Man, they were so excited to get and
Wonderful.
you could tell they were readers too, just like you
Yes,
said. I noticed
yes,
exactly what you're talking about. That
yes.
they were hanging on every word, and they had very insightful questions, and it was exciting to see. I mean, these just
Yes.
little second graders,
Yes.
but man, they were
Yeah.
so excited, and
Yes, yes. And so you totally understand what I'm talking about. And I know you love to work with children too, which is great, because the more we can impact children, uh, the better our world is going to be. But it's us as adults and parents really making an impact.
that's it. Yeah, that's a great legacy to read. Hey, if you're listening right now, share this episode. Let's get this reading revolution spreading
Yes,
everywhere like
started.
wildfire.
Started and spread. Yes,
That's
yes.
it. Hey,
Yes.
thank you so much for what you're doing out there. I think a lot of people don't realize the enormity of this problem. Those numbers were
Mhm.
shocking to me. I mean, I thought it was, kids probably having a little bit of trouble. I didn't know
Yes.
almost
Yes.
70% of them were not up to their level. So,
Almost. And that's public school and charter schools, because
wow.
charter schools are supposedly to be better, but it always requires the parent to be really uh in tune as to what's happening in their child's school. And paying attention. As a parent, I supplemented my son's reading at home, so I just didn't rely on what the school did, just supplementation. So there's a lot, and it's up to the parents, nobody else.
That's it. Well,
Yeah, thank you so much, Joe. It's
oh,
wonderful being
absolutely.
on
Yeah,
your
well,
show.
thank you for being on here. Yeah, and like they said, readers are leaders, and you've definitely been a leader throughout your whole life
Thank
in
you.
the legal field, and now on this reading revolution. So
Yes,
keep up the
yes.
great work. We're going to support that. And
Thank
if you're
you.
listening right now, like I said, please share this episode. Go to our website, check out some of those books. Maybe you got one of your kids, you want to buy them some of those books. Check out the videos.
Yes,
If you're having a little trouble getting your kid going, she's going to help you out. Obviously, she gave
yes,
you some little tidbits here, but get the videos. It's going to be chock full of information. Go pick those up. And like I said, keep sharing it. And you guys keep up the sharing of the reading revolution yourself. It doesn't have to stop with
yes,
kids. We can be adults and
yes.
read too.
Exactly, exactly. Continue reading all the time.
That's it. And I recommend
Yes.
starting with Calvin and Hobbes. If you're not reading
Oh
right
my
now,
gosh.
the
Yes,
best.
the best.
That's it. Judge Coffelt, thank you so much for being on here today. I appreciate what you're doing, and thank you for being on here. And we'll see you guys next week on the Relentless Positivity Podcast.
Yes, thanks again. Have
Wow, what a great episode. You just share that with somebody. I'm going to share with you some awesome sponsors. McWilliams Marketing. They can help your business grow. Regardless of the size of the project, you're going to get a solution that is specifically created for you and your business. No cookie cutter, one size fits approach here. So Amy and her band of fearless marketers can help you with all that stuff that you think you can do, but you're not really that good at it. You don't have time for it. They can do that. They're the experts. It's what they do. Web design, online conversion optimization, SEO, graphic design, marketing, page management, all that stuff. Go let them do that. Don't handle that yourself. Go check them out at mcwilliamsmarketing.com. See what all they can do. They're amazing people. Teak Patnick with Patnick Realty. He really does it all in the real estate world. General real estate sales, acquisitions, property management, investments, all that good stuff. You're not just a transaction with Teak. He really wants to build a relationship for life with you. He has built his whole business on prayer, hard work ethic, honesty, and results. You can trust Patnick Realty with all your real estate needs. Hey, I trust my brother from another mother, Teak, and you should too. Give him a call, 256-694-0117, or email him at teak@patnickco.com. Hey, these are awesome businesses. Go support them. They're out supporting positivity, and they will do you right. Have an awesome day.